to be on this webinar with you all today, and the title, as you can see on the screen, is Reading the Processes of Earth's Ecosystem. And my name is Christopher Cooke, and I'll tell you a bit about myself in a few moments. But first of all, I just want to say that it's delightful for me to be on this Erickson's Eco Coaching series, and I do hope that what I'm going to offer today builds on the two themes that Marilyn Atkinson brought into this conversation in her session last week, which is that I want this to contribute to the news story, and also I want you to realise that what we're going to look at today is significant in all forms of strategic engagement that you may choose to apply as a coach. Now, Marilyn spoke about times of crisis, times of change, and it's times of big learning. And really the niche I've served in society since probably 1983 is really growing and becoming ever clearer on what it means to be a strategic coach, strategic mentor as well, perhaps I would call it that. But the niche I seem to have fallen into back in 1983 was that of a troubleshooter. It's always been an aspect of my career, and that means that from a change management thinking perspective, I've always been used to going into places where no one has been before. So there's three things that I'm intrigued with in terms of my offering today. One is the uniqueness of Earth, and definitely it's our home. And secondly, I want to really help expand this understanding that our well-being, all aspects of our global civilization, depends on Earth's ecosystem. And last but not least, one of the outcomes that I'm offering in this session today is that I want to stimulate holistic thinking. Now, what does that mean? So as an Erickson partner, I'm known for my work in offering an understanding of spiral dynamics and the spiral dynamics lineage, which today in my offering through Erickson is known as full spectrum emergence. What we do know is that the life conditions now on this planet are creating and stimulating the emergence of new thinking. So the way that I've used Schopenhauer's words just to give you a taste of what this transition from green to yellow and beyond is like, at this stage, it's literally to think what no one has yet thought about that which everybody sees. So we're stepping into the unknown, but with a high degree of certainty in an uncertain world. So the question I'd like you to join me on today is, how do we assure that the choices we make and the actions we take leave behind a recovered and regenerative Earth? It's designed to be a very practical session. I'm going to ask you to post any questions in the chat as we go through, and I'll be seeing the questions as they arise, and I'll build them into what I'm going to offer you today. I do have a lot that I want to offer, and we'll pick up any questions at the end that are left over. So there's 5 questions, 5 phases to what I want to work with you on today. What is our holistic context? This word holistic. What are ecosystem processes? What does it mean? What does it mean when Christopher offers a session such as this? And then when we've got some understanding of these ecosystem processes, the next question becomes the main practice of this particular session. And that is, how do I read ecosystem processes? Now, inevitably, you're all very practical on this call, and the next question is, how do I practice my new insights? And I'm going to give you a nudge to get out there onto a piece of land that you're perhaps visiting on your daily exercise as you step outside your homes in this time of COVID-19. But there's plenty of chance to practice. And last but not least, we'll come together in some conclusion and hopefully look at the implications of this from a coaching perspective. Materialism is the dominant worldview that embraces our planet at the moment. But one of the aspects of that worldview is that it does dominate nature. And we enjoy a very materialistic lifestyle. We live to a very high standard. But as Jared Diamond reminded us in 2007, and I know this data is a bit dated, but for me it captures accurately the scale of the challenge, that if all 7 billion of us were living a first world lifestyle, the lifestyle that you and I enjoy, they will all consume the resources equivalent to 74 billion people. That's the issue. It's our materialistic approach where we dominate and discount nature. Now, the scale of man's impact on the planet is now becoming known as the Anthropocene, the era that man influenced and shaped the planet. What we tend not to be aware of, though, is we discount and ignore nature, that basically it's the root of all of our activities on the planet, and it's the basis of all human wealth. And ultimately, and this is a quote from Alan Savory, who I've tracked as one of the emergent thinkers into second-tier practice, that he ultimately, the only wealth that can sustain any community, economy or nation is designed from a photosynthetic process, green plants growing on regenerating soil. So we're going to step into the full scope of my career over the last 30 years and say, well, actually, we're going to operate in this conversation from the soil to the stomach to the soul, from the basis of all life on Earth through to the stomach, which links to human health and well-being, through to the soul, which links to our understanding of the development of our psychology that may well be communicated very accurately through the spiral dynamics lineage. But what do we mean by soil, and how does it link to many of the conversations we're having on the planet today? So this image just gives you a quick image or metaphor to add to the new story. On the left, you have rock. You can touch, you can test, you can bash rock. It sinks in water, for example. But on the right is living soil. And the only difference is the organic living carbon. Carbon, the main energy transport capability on this planet, it turns rock into a sponge by the carbon and the organic material dissolving and pushing apart the minerals to create a healthy soil. And a healthy soil is a living soil. Now, the challenge as we discount and dominate nature is that if we look back from space, we don't appear to be doing too good a job. We're viewed, if you look at it from an external perspective, as rather a desert-making species. It's very difficult to make desert on this green planet, but in many cases we've succeeded where nature has failed. This is the big story. It also means that when the change in the life conditions, such as COVID-19 and all the other issues that we're dealing with, start to affect us, it does shift our thinking. This change in the life conditions now is rapid and vast. So if we look at the demographics for a few moments, 50% of the world's population is less than 30 years of age. So how many of you on this call fall into that category? I know I'm a good bit older, but I can look back in with great empathy and realize that the change will come from within our societies as these new minds start to determine our priorities. Now, if we look at the research and look at the data, and this is from the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers Survey in 2017, the number one priority for this group of millennials, let's call them that, the number one priority is climate change and the destruction of nature. And you can see here on the chart that it shows clearly that climate change and destruction of nature is a significant feature. But what I want to highlight to you when we're in this conversation about climate change and desertification is this issue of large-scale conflicts and wars is often triggered and catalyzed and amplified through desertification when food and water supplies become scarce. So if we're watching the news and looking at the Yemen, that's a significant issue around poor access to food and water. So this is the issue, that the root cause of many of the social dynamics that we're dealing with is a consequence of our domination and devaluing of nature, this process of desertification. But I have certain hope in an uncertain world, and if we look into the global Erickson network, we have this game, the world game, that's been initiated. And it's not difficult to start to get a sense of the enduring quality of life that we're looking for in this process. And at the bottom of the screen here, the bottom of the slide, I've just tentatively offered you a holistic context, a story or part of the story that we'll use until a new story emerges. It's good enough. Our holistic context, perhaps, is team humanity living in harmony with each other and their habitat. Well, that sounds pretty good. A healthy planet, based on what I've said so far, essential. But last but not least, discovering our role in the universe. Now this is different. And what I want to do for the rest of our conversation is encourage us to not only look back in from our local habitat and the role of planet, but I want us to look back in from the perspective of universe. These three dimensions will be essential for us as we work as eco-coaches. Now, as our thinking changes, as life conditions change, it isn't limited to the younger generation that new thinking is emerging. There is no limit in terms of age, as we know from the work of Claire Graves, but there's no limit on the age range of when new thinking can emerge. So it's inevitable that in the back room, in the fringes of what's emerging on our planet today, that a more holistically oriented science is actually emerging. And these words by Arthur Young, I'd like you just to allow them to soak as you ponder them and just notice what thoughts they inspire within you. The universe is a theatre of increasingly complex organisation in which man has a definite place, without any upper limit to his evolution. Now, Arthur's not saying that the biological form will stay the same. He's saying there is no upper limit to this evolutionary process. Now, some of the metaphors that we'll need to include as part of the new story that Marilyn alluded to in the last call is drawn from individuals such as Arthur Young, who sees the universe as a reflexive universe. And today we can look back in and draw from a wide range of scientific understanding to see that there is a pattern. This 13.8 billion year journey has left behind patterns of life that we are increasingly familiar with for our understanding of nuclear physics, of chemistry, of molecular biology, of an understanding of the microbiome on the planet, an understanding of the plant kingdom, an understanding of the animal kingdom, and an understanding of this strange species, Homo sapiens sapiens, Homo sapiens sapiens. And you can see there I've included the symbol for spiral dynamics in there because in my broader work, which I'm really known for, my focus on human emergence is predicated on this understanding of the waves of human development. But to do that, we need to look back in from a universe perspective. And most importantly, at the top of the screen, the message I want to offer you at this stage is that the universe is unfinished. Creative evolution really does rule. And who knows what's going to happen next. Now, okay, so I've set a big context. So what then are ecosystem processes? So let's build on this image that shows what I call the cosmic tick. This is the blue line that passes through the center of this imagery. I call it the cosmic tick. But basically we could start here and say as a principle, basically everything that goes on this planet is a function of stardust, of water, of solar energy and complex life form interaction. So the field effect caused by the radiation of energy from our sun and the gifts and miracles of photosynthesis and the ability to convert that energy into a more growth-oriented process, a syntropic process, is really where our attention needs to be to understand these ecosystem processes. So these four processes, stardust, water, solar energy, and complex life form interaction, the meshing together of many species in a creative evolutionary dynamic, is really the basis of these four ecosystem processes, because they speak and reveal themselves through all biological life forms. So the conversation we're going to have is around the energy flow, the mineral cycling, the water cycling, and the dynamics of living organisms. Why am I doing this? Because we need to do something different. Basically, the climate change issue is telling us that We've not been too good in applying our thinking. Now I'm suggesting it's a chance for us to move forward to be more approximately right. But a definition, an ecosystem. We're using the language frequently in this conversation around eco-coaching. Now, on this slide, I offer definition, and it's the right-hand side of that cosmic tick. It's that growth where solar energy contributes to biological growth, starting with photosynthesis, building that firm microbiome and soil base that's become the basis of all life in syntropy. And it's a creative evolutionary process of which we are a part. We are a stimulus in this creative evolutionary process. And that creative evolutionary process today brings us into the language of the science of emergence, where all that existed before is transcended but included in the next wave of the development of this planet. It's fundamentally an energy processing and nutrient regenerating ecosystem. In terms of language, we do need to be cautious as we go forward because Earth has one ecosystem. James Lovelock in his work of Gaia was hinting at that, but now we understand that Earth has one ecosystem. And in the conversation with you, I'm going to ask you to consider that it has many environments or habitats. So wherever you're calling in from today, you're calling in from your local environment or local habitat. But whatever you do on that, in your locality, whatever you choose to do and influence and act, which comes into contact with the land, influences these four ecosystem processes. So you are plugging and playing into Earth's ecosystem through the water cycle, the mineral cycle, the interaction between all life forms, which in this slide we call community dynamics, and energy flow, which is the way in which solar energy is converted into useful form. Now, we need to be practical. And one of the farmers we work with gave us a lovely phrase when he said, hey, our business is very simple. We just catch light and pass it on. And so from this journey from the sun to green growing plants in healthy soil, through all the interactions with all the animals that stimulate the further growth of the grass, but produce all of our, that produce the soil, the fiber, and the foods that we enjoy. So in terms of our definition of the agriculture, and I do agree with Marilyn that we need to reconsider agriculture radically. Agriculture in the conversation we're having here is really the growth of the development and growth of fiber and food. Now when we look at the whole flow of this conversation, we're looking at the utilization of solar energy, water, minerals and living organisms to create this abundance of food and provision. And obviously, many of the conversations we're going into at the moment are asking the questions. How does it contribute to our wellness, our physical health? How does it contribute to our well-being, our social engagement? And last but not least, how does what we grow leave behind ecological vitality, which we can argue is demonstrated through regenerative land. So how do you learn to read these ecosystem processes? Now, the work of Alan Savory, the work that we're involved with of holistic management, which, as I said earlier, I'm very interested in it as an active case study on the planet, a very early stage, very established understanding of second-tier thinking. This transition from green to yellow that we know about in spiral dynamics. And in that work over the last 60 years, so this thinking is hard won over many years, we know that key land surface indicators of the ecosystem processes, of the ecosystem process function are learnable. It can be taught, and we're going to teach you the early stages of doing that in this class today. And the good news is, and I often say this can be taught from primary school to prime minister or primary school to president, but obviously I'm using my vernacular that's common in England. But basically what I'm saying here to you all is that these can be taught from childhood, and there is no upper age limit. So here's an understanding of reading and becoming aware of these ecosystem processes to bring a new significance to every decision and tool that we use on the planet that nobody can avoid. It applies for the most senior individual, from Prime Minister or President through to primary school. So in the conversation we're going to have today, we're going to learn to assess the ecosystem processes on land. And I'm going to offer you a little tool that's an example of the sort of things that we do to stimulate and release holistic awareness, but also it's very applicable to helping build up an understanding of the regenerative, how to develop regenerative capabilities. And I'm going to ask you to interact with me in the chat, and I want you to be thinking about a piece of land. I want you to think about a piece of land that you're familiar with, and I want you to just type into chat your initials. So for example, on the screen here, my initials are CGC, dot, I'm in the UK, dot, and the park I'm thinking of as I have the conversation with you is Reddish Park. So it looks like we've got the Gareth leading the way. Thank you, Gareth, for leading the way. I want you to think about a piece of land that you can access and you're familiar with. So I'm going to leave you typing away with that. And it's good to see we've got a wide range of countries. Germany, Poland, the USA, Canada, Switzerland, Turkey, the Canadian prairies. Well, I want you to be thinking about a piece of land that you can access, and obviously in the times of COVID, I know that you don't have easy access to this land, but choose a piece of land that you might be exercising on or you've got a good mental image on, whilst I take you on an understanding of a journey into reading and understanding these 4 ecosystem processes. So the first one is this conversation on water cycle. We're going to look into the 4 windows into the same room, Earth's ecosystem, through this window of the water cycle. Now we're looking for an effective water cycle. So what can be classed as good, the high scoring effective water cycles are on the left hand side of the screen. And on the right is the non-effective. These are the situations we tend to want to avoid. And what we're looking for in terms of things to avoid, we want to avoid bare soil. We want to avoid bare soil where high evaporation occurs, where rain falls on the surface and evaporates straight off, because effective rainfall means that the water stays on the land and is utilized by the plants and the microorganisms in that locality. Equally, in a non-effective situation with bare soil, we get a very high reflectivity, reflection of energy back up into the atmosphere, which is not helpful to us at this time. And if the water cycle is not effective, transpiration can be poor. So with an effective water cycle, the big message is that everything is in full flight. Transpiration is the greatest gift we have that ultimately will cool the planet, but it all starts with green growing plants on regenerative soil. And we're showing here a range of grasses, of shrubs, of trees, and you can see here the number of arrows indicate the higher transpiration. And in that transpiration, it's not just water vapor that emerges out of the trees, it's the aerobacteria. And it's those aerobacteria that seed the rain. So it's true to say in all situations, that the effective water cycle, the aerobacteria through the trees and the transpiration from all plant life actually call in the rain. So if we want to look at a good example, perhaps close to a 10 when we're looking down into this grass, but remember that I'm just looking down. I might have to get onto my hands and knees and look and see how dense the growth of the plants is. This is what I would see looking down into a grassland. This grassland is from a dairy farm in North America. That might be close to an 8 or a 9 actually when I look at it. Equally, if I'm going to be assessing this particular situation, notice how we've got bare soil. And notice here, look at how this brave little plant, a different species, that can cope with the crust or the capping that occurs on the surface. Notice how this little plant, as the bracken, is opened up and pushed back the crust. But if rain falls on that surface, what do you think happens? It tends to run off. And when you get the runoff and you're taking soil and the soil surfaces, you tend to see discoloration in the rivers, as rivers in times of heavy rainfall are carrying away tons and tons and tons of some of the most valuable asset on the planet, healthy soil. So we've got a taste of this effective and non-effective water cycles. Now later, towards the end of the session, I'm going to invite you to download the document that captures this, but I want you to work on screen at the moment. And you'll see here on the left-hand side, we've got the key points that highlight what's an effective water cycle. So a 10 will be very high plant density, no bare soil, water and air infiltrate soil quickly and easily. So if you poured water onto the soil surface, it would quickly permeate and infiltrate into the soil. High plant rootability, it takes a bit more skill, but you might be able to look at the edge of rabbit holes and badger holes, or just take a spade and go and have a look. You'll know how deep and how integrated the soil is below the ground. There'll be no signs of erosion, no signs of runoff, no signs of discoloration in nearest streams or rivers. And in conversations, or if you're there on a piece of land, you'd see it's highly flood resilient, or equally droughts are rare. So what I'd like you to do, just make a note on a piece of paper next to where you're working with me at this moment, and just come up with an assessment of your water cycle score for the piece of land that you are thinking of. Just think about it. Now, I'm not looking for 5.1. I'm looking for just enough to get you engaged. 1 non-effective water cycle, 10 effective water cycles. So just keep a note of the score, and I'm going to ask you to add the 4 scores together, and we'll discuss them at the end of the session. But thank you for those of you putting the scores in, because what it shows is there's a high degree of functioning of the water cycle in the locations in which you are thinking. But notice the range, currently 5 to 9, a big spectrum. Now, an image just to give you certain hope in an uncertain world is that an effective water cycle is the soul of all life. Now, those are the words from an Austrian engineer or water scientist called Victor Schoberger. And here on the screen, you've got a cross-section of a glass stem. And the water capillaries are shown in blue. But water pervades every cell and every aspect of this plant. And as I said, water, certainly in my view, is the soul of all life. Now, the piece of land I can see Tanya's assessing my water cycle for the piece of land I'm thinking of. Well, actually, I'm going to give it a 6, actually, because I was on my walk yesterday, and I'll talk about that later. But where do we go to next? Let's look into another window. Let's look in the window of the mineral cycle. Now, it's very interesting at the moment when we look at the basis of human health, because the movement of minerals or nutrients, including carbon, nitrogen, and other essential nutrients, they're all essential in the grand scheme of things. And what's noticeable here is this mineral cycle affects all forms of life, or so does the water cycle. But look here, from the microorganisms, the plants, the animals, and humans. And certainly in one of the big trouble spots I worked in, which was a 30-year drought in Australia, it became rapidly known that basically if you have healthy soil, you have healthy plants, you have healthy animals, and you have healthy humans. Now on the right-hand side here, we can see here that humans require over 90 essential nutrients. And these nutrients aren't just derived from the nearest quarry, these are often derived by the processes that are shown on the left-hand diagram. The nutrients required are plant-derived or animal-derived nutrients. And there's over 90 that Joel Wallach in his work on epigenetics describes as being essential. 60 minerals, 2 to 3 essential fatty acids, 16 vitamins, 12 amino acids. Don't ask me to list them all. But basically, every living organism on the planet takes the waste or the byproducts and from one plant, from one form, and turns it into useful energy. So the mineral cycle and this image also linked to the way in which the water cycle and in which the way energy flows through our planet. And the little image to the right here shows how you'll tend to see the mineral cycle showing itself on a piece of land, because it's really the rapidity of the cycling from birth, from growth through to decomposition. And in different climates, in more arid climates, it's more oxidation, a slow chemical breakdown of material, rather than more humid and temperate climates where the insects and the microbes will break down dry materials, such as is shown in this image, very, very quickly. Now, just to give you a bit more information so you can do your analysis. On the right-hand side, it shows a low effective mineral cycle. On the left, an effective, highly effective mineral cycle. So high transpiration and soil-based minerals are lifted up on the left-hand side of the screen. Soil is covered. It's living and fast-decaying plant materials. So when you're looking at your land, you're looking for the new growth, the mature growth, and the decaying and dying plant material. A rich life cycle. On the right-hand side, the ineffective mineral cycle, bare soil, minerals are washed away. Remember, we spoke about the water cycle, water washing away surface material, and it's a low rate of decay. So low organic matter in the soil, and minerals tend to get washed and leached out. So that organic matter that I spoke about earlier is really important. Now, when we look at photographs, we can see here this distinction. Look on the left, the high degree of bare soil, the stunted plants. On the right-hand side, just notice the covered soil, not only where the maize plants are growing, but also on the ground. And the only difference between these two pieces of land is on the right, a more effective water cycle stimulated through livestock, and also a more effective mineral cycle stimulated not only through the livestock, but stimulated through the high degree of availability of plant life. Plant-derived nutrients. I want to go back to this point again. So just look here, the range of colours. We have a farmer not far from us here in northern England who describes 54 shades of green. And I want you to notice the green as well as the other colours, the reddish browns and the lighter colours that show the plants are in senescence, but when that material comes into contact with the soil, it's quickly incorporated in more temperate climates. So, you know the game now. Circle or choose your mineral cycle score. An effective 10 is when the surface litter cover is high. So when you go for a walk, you have to go down and look for the dead material that's in contact with the soil. And you can also sometimes see where the decaying material goes from the surface litter, the twigs and the stems of the plants going through to humus and the decaying mulch. Old vegetation breaks down quickly. Large number of insects or microorganisms present. Very little exposed soil, very little exposed soil. Plant roots are abundant with deep penetration and a good soil structure with abundant underground life. Now notice the scores that are going into chat over here, and notice there's a slight downward trend in the overall scores. But that's the mineral cycle. So notice how you're getting the gist of this, and I want to look at energy flow, because this is also another way to look into the whole, to look into the window through your habitat at Earth's ecosystem. And we're talking about the energy flow both above and below ground. There's more energy, more biomass below the ground than there is above the ground. And energy flow describes the movement of energy from the sun to all living or once living things. So this is where photosynthesis and decomposition are all part of this energy flow. And what you look for when you're assessing energy flow is plant density. How many plants are there in a certain area? Look at the leaf area, the size of the leaves and the height of the plants, for example. If you're in areas where there's grazing, making sure there's adequate recovery time from grazing, but also understanding that at different times of the year there are different rates of growth. Now these photographs are from Germany. Just notice the different energy flow on the left, where these cattle are. The grass is quite stunted, it's being grazed, but look on the right where Viviane is standing. Just look at the excitement as she discovers how to create a new level of abundance by understanding solar flow, solar energy flow, understanding the water cycle, and understanding the mineral cycle, and how to make them effective on her land. See there the abundance. Now, this is ready for grazing, but why she's got her arm out is that this is a different grass to the grass the previous year. So the nature of the grass and the stature of the grass changes as our thinking changes. And notice here, all you have to look for is the area of leaf. Which area? Is it on the right or is it on the left that's got the higher energy flow? So thinking about the piece of land that you're familiar with, do your assessment. Very high plant density with closely spaced plants, effective energy flow. Broad plants, broad-leafed plants, suggest good conversion of solar energy. Plant leaves are grazed with less than 40% usage. So we never see fields pruned like we saw on the left-hand side of that photograph before. But we might. Plants are given sufficient recovery time to fully restore energy and roots. So this might draw on your memory of how the land has been used and how nature changes the dynamics of the land that you're thinking of. So nature and man's impact, and man's decisions, changes and influences these ecosystem processes. So the energy scores are quite high. We've got a range from 5 to 9 again in the energy flow. The community dynamics is really one that I find fascinating, because as a window into the whole, these communities of different life forms are the expression of the water, the mineral, and solar energy cycles. These life forms are the patterns left behind after those three dynamics have shaped themselves. So we're talking about succession in plant, animal, and human communities that are ever changing. And it's a never-ending development of biological communities. There is no endpoint in nature. As I said earlier, even though we're 14 billion years in, who knows what's possible next? But we're talking about the successional dynamics. And if I take my cosmic tick and just show you the successional dynamics around the plant kingdom, it might look something like this. But this, you have to remember that plants such as these have only been emerging on the planet over the last 400 million years. Microbes started to emerge from the oceans about 400 million years ago, and Earth fully formed about 3.8 billion years ago. But what you see here is the successional dynamics. As one species becomes successful, the ecosystem processes reach a peak and a high vitality, which then creates the life conditions that shapes new life forms that have never been seen before. And what we have the privilege of is looking back in at that successional series for our science, our understanding of ecology, and so on. But the key in this understanding of community dynamics is that the greater diversity of species, the greater resilience. So beware the monocultures that we tend to focus on in our agricultural base. And this diagram just gives you a quick sense of if you have a particular species, high numbers within the population oscillate between high and low. Very high variation down here because there's a low diversity of species. The high end, the strategic consideration for all of our work, the strategic coaches in our eco-coaching practice is that the more diversity, the greater the resilience. So it leads to some reverse logic. If you have pests, you have an imbalance. Something's out of kilter. The remedy is to add species, not remove species, to restore the balance. So when you look down into this grass, how many species can you see? Now, unfortunately, I can't give you the sounds of the insects and the animals, and I can't give you the sense, that feel-good sense that you would have when you sense the vitality of this land. And you would notice a different aroma, a different smell. And if you put your hand into the soil and just lift out some of the soil, it will smell sweet, it would smell good. And this other photograph here from Ireland, a different habitat, very diverse, with over 20-odd species, plant species, around these young children. But it drew them in. Just notice how it feels good and it smells good. And they are definitely here in the animals and insects. And they can't yet conceptualize the diversity and succession. But I'm using this photograph just to get the point across. So thinking about the piece of land that you're thinking of, how effective are the community dynamics? Are there many forms of plants? Or if it's an arable, is many crops mixed together? Is there a richness of biodiversity? Are the diverse age structures in the population a blend of the young, the adolescent, the mature, and the senescent? Is there high genetic diversity, many species, synergistically operating in a similar location? And if it was left, if the land was left in certain parts of the world, or stimulated appropriately using grazing animals in other more arid parts of the world, does it succeed? Does it leap forward, becoming more complex? So again, I can see the scores going in the chat, and Tanya must be pleased because the next question I believe she's got available for us, because I want you to tally up the 4 scores that you had and just put them into chat. Okay, so for example, your initials, your country, and the total score is shown on the screen. So the total score I gave my piece of land was 23. Perhaps I'm too critical, but also I realized that the land was pretty degraded. So let's have a look and see where we go. We've got the range with 28 to 30, somewhere in this range in the scoring at the moment. 6. Now, Sue I think is scoring the community dynamics. So perhaps if you add up your community dynamics with your water cycle, with your mineral cycle, and Sue just come back in with another a total of the 4. So we've got a range from 24 to 27. So we're seeing 23 to 27. And we've got 29 as the highest. Okay. Now, I know we're having fun as we're doing this and playing a bit of game, but it's for a reason. Because what's the message? What's the message that you can take if your land is scoring 23 or your land is scoring 30? What is that telling you? What is possible? Perhaps you could just respond in the chat. Because what it says to me is that there's much more that's possible. And obviously, we have to be bringing some humility into this, in that we realize we're using a rough assessment. But it's good enough to say that much more is possible. And very often in our work in monoculture, agriculture, here in Europe, certainly in the UK, we find we can be somewhere between the 12 to 15 score, which means there's massive potential. So I suspect that all of you are walkers and access to some high quality land. But still, it's telling us that on this rough assessment, there is much more that's possible. Now, when you're working with subjective assessments like this, what I'm also interested in is how repeatable and reliable is this? And this method is the starting point for a journey to become a verification framework on the planet. So we can go anywhere on the planet and use this assessment to come up with an ecological health index. So the final score you've come up with on this little session, we're going to call it today the ecological health index. Now, it may well be that when we learn how to release and stimulate these ecosystem processes, what was originally your 10 becomes your new 4 or 5, because we really do not know what's possible as we release nature from a very materialistic, reductionist, conventional agricultural base. It's an exciting time to ponder this. Now, how do you practice your new insights? Because, like it or not, I've been offering you a new story, and I hope that you're getting a sense of being drawn in towards the screen, or at least if you sit back pondering, you're starting to see the relevance of this to you. Now, there's a document that I'm going to invite you to download, and it's a document that gives you a chance to go out into the field, just as shown in this photograph here, when a group of people have gone out to take their land management discovery tour and just go and assess the land. And we want you to practice with a buddy. Now, in these times of isolation through COVID, you can still do this virtually. So it might well be you go out, you take some photographs and talk your assessment through with a buddy, and hopefully someone on this course or on this session. But equally, it may well be an opportunity to become the teacher of somebody else and tell them and teach them about what you do. So here we have a very interesting way of starting to understand the ecosystem process function in your habitat, knowing that as you create an upliftment and the practices and the metrics you can put in place using a similar method can show when the land is regenerating, but equally you can nip in the bud any practices that lead to a downstretch of the land or a degenerative process. But here we can start to work together to stimulate a release of the recovery and regeneration of Earth, all Earth. But we started the session with the question, and how do we assure that the choices we make and the actions we take leave behind a recovered and regenerative Earth? And I would hope that you're starting to realize that perhaps one of the ways in which we can achieve this is by testing all of our decisions, no matter where we exist in society. The impact of every choice, every purchase, every use of every tool will have an impact on ecosystem processes. So what can I offer as a conclusion in this session we've done today? I want to go back to the holistic context. Team humanity living in harmony with each other and their habitat. A healthy planet, discovering our role in the universe. Now, what I'm suggesting is that an understanding of these ecosystem processes provides us with a holistic eco-compass. I want to bring some new language into the conversation. And this will stimulate our eco-logic that we utilize in eco-coaching. Now, as in the last call, Melanie was asked, do we have to call it eco-coaching? No, I'm trying to offer some language that allows us to differentiate from all that we're familiar with. But you can see here how the habitat and healthy planet and role in the universe links to the whole conversation that we've had today, realizing that if we want to work with Earth and the successful development of our species, we do well to ensure that our decisions are tested against these 4 ecosystem processes. And as we do that, we will be thinking what no one has yet thought about that which everybody sees. So I'm happy for some questions, and I'm just checking my time. I'm surprised more than anybody that we've got about 10 minutes, I believe, for questions. So I'm happy to take any questions. If you type into chat, I'm just checking with Tanya to make sure I've not missed any questions. I don't think I saw any questions come through. And the the document, I believe, the link to the document, the PDF document, Tanya has put into chat, so if you can make sure you click on that and download.
Yeah, no questions coming in the chat as of yet, Christopher. Just a reminder to put it into all participants. And you might want to click on the next document over the land management, and people will have a visual of the document that they're getting with the download. There you go.
So what you can expect is a document formatted like this. It's called How Healthy Is Your Land? We've used this the world over. And it's designed to be a trifold document. So you'll see on one side of an A4 or letter format, it's divided into 3 sections, and if you print it in landscape, it will form a nice little handout for you. I mean, what we encourage you to use this as much as you can. I've used it extensively. If I do conferences, I can often get the whole audience out into the field next to the conference center. We go and assess the ecosystem processes. This is how we start the introductory training for all business leaders or farmers in their practices. So the access to the recordings of these seminars, Tanya, I wonder if you could just talk about that, please.
Yes, I will, and I'll plant the seed for the question that Selma has asked in the chat as well. What do you think about soilless plant development, I think is the word? Yeah, soilless plant development. And I'll post in the chat the link where you'll find the recording of today's session once Erickson has an opportunity to upload it. So go ahead, Christopher, and answer Selma's question.
Thank you. It's a great question, Selma. A lot of conversations around aeroponics, hydroponics, and so on and so forth. The challenge is that we do not fully understand how soil functions. What I do know from my experience in water treatment, wastewater treatment, that if you have soil in the system, the results completely outperform the results than if you don't have soil in the system. And I'm talking there about very large reed bed installations. And the concern I have is around aeroponics and hydroponic-based plants is that they're dependent on the minerals and the fertilizers that are used, and that bypasses a lot of the processes that we've really talked about today in this conversation. I'm just going to go back to an earlier slide just to reinforce this point. Because what we're saying is that if we provide all the nutrients that the plant needs, and I don't think you'll typically find more than 5 to 10 nutrients in many fertilizers that are used for aeroponics, it bypasses the plant function. Because on this image here, what's critical for you to understand is the microbes around the plant roots that the plant is feeding, because it's the microbiological activity of the microbes that converts the minerals into a form that the plant can most readily utilize. Just like in your gut, according to macrobiotics, if you understand macrobiotic diets, the microbes in your gut take plant and animal-derived minerals and convert them into a form that you can most readily utilize. So perhaps not the best idea, but I'm open to learning, but I've not yet found a soilless plant practice that comes up with anything near the nutritional density that I'm talking about here. And there's another question here from Tammy. Is this similar to Rudolf Steiner's work in biodynamic farming? There's a strong link here, because what Rudolf Steiner was really focusing on was really an understanding and embellishment of the mineral cycle, but linking the capacities of many earth minerals really to a more spiritual dimension. So the cosmic tick really is the blue cosmic tick that I showed really takes us into a more spiritual dynamic in a world of mystery. And as Rudolf Steiner, I'm completely aligned with Rudolf Steiner, is that by whatever means we need to align ourselves with the physical, the subtle, and the causal aspects of our life on Earth. And that means that we really need to grow our understanding of the more subtle. So we train a lot of biodynamic practitioners to utilize this, because thinking from a process perspective is not something that is often taught in biodynamics. Now, in one word, I hope so, that was the answer. In one word, from the same as hopeful. How do we get the material? Where can we access the recordings of these webinars? So that we'll let Tanya come back to that. Now, I'm really excited here from I think it's Carmel Lee. I will use this for our project in northern Uganda. That's great. And she asked the question, I suppose there will work there as well. So what we're saying is that wherever you go on the planet, these ecosystem processes speak through your habitat. Your challenge is to learn the language of that land. Now, there are some factors that need to be considered, because the degree of humidity on the soil surface the year round means that different tools need to be considered. So tools that we might use successfully in the UK would actually cause desertification in certain parts of the world. But in terms of northern Uganda, yes, you go use this, and also I'd encourage you to read further. What tools are available to open up our clients' understanding of ecosystem processes? Well, you have a tool in the little handout that I've given you, but the broader topic of inquiry is around holistic management. And as I said, in my interest in understanding human emergence, largely, in my view, best described through the work of Claire Graves and the spiral dynamics lineage, and this work actually is the emergence of process awareness, which is really the green-yellow transition. Now then, what tools are available to open our clients' understanding of ecosystem processes? And I meant without soil, and I'm just wondering where that links to.
Oh, Selma was the original question about soil lift, meant without soil.
So when does the eco-coaching training begin? Well, arguably it started. The cat is out of the bag, and my colleagues follow on from myself and Marilyn to give you the tasters, the stories of the scope, and I'm really excited to hear what they've got to say. And in terms of the eco-coaching training, Tanya, perhaps you can talk and help people understand about how to sign up. The world moving more towards turquoise. Well, my view is that in the transition to green towards yellow and turquoise, one of the great ways in which you can stimulate your own life conditions or create life conditions that stimulates the release of innate second-tier thinking is by learning to read the patterns of these ecosystem processes. I see joy in fields when people start to realize that there's much more to life than just a bag of chemical fertilizer. So being able to read these processes seems to stimulate and release the latent capacity on that track towards turquoise, as you described. Okay, I'm just checking. Would the following question help create self-awareness in leaders? Are humans a keystone species? Well, keystone tends to refer to a species that links and bridges everything together, impacts all life in their locality. So I would suggest that if you take that definition, that it's a species that stimulates the full expression of all life that can be measured through these ecosystem processes, because fundamentally the organism or the activity or the tool will do nothing more than stimulate and release the vitality of these ecosystem processes. Yes, from that definition, humans are a keystone species because we influence everything that is occurring on this planet, and it's time now for us to step back and observe and act from a fresh perspective. So I'm complete. I'm just going to give Tanya a minute or so just to summarize any next steps for you all, but I've been delighted by your questions, and thank you, and I look forward to seeing more of you on the journey as this unfolds.
So I'm just posting in the chat again where you can find the recording for the session. Give it a few days to be uploaded, perhaps, being a holiday day today. And also there are other webinars coming up, so feel free to have a look at the program series that are listed there. And as far as registration for the eco-coaching training, if you message me your interest here, I can have somebody follow up with you. Further information is still to come on that, and you'll be getting an email with information, and it'll be posted on the Erickson website. So I think that that's complete, and thank you for your time, energy, questions, and what's coming next. Bye for now, everyone.
And Tanya,
yes.
I'd just like to thank you for all your support in making this happen, and that's a big thank you from me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Happy to do it.